Common Core standards, adopted by New York State in 2010, were created to better educate our students, to raise their level of education relative to their counterparts in other countries. That makes sense. In recent decades, we've seen disheartening comparisons between our students and those in other countries. So doing something about that certainly makes sense. Now, it's always easy to trash some new initiative before it's found its legs. So the long view suggests patience on our part and flexibility on the part of the program's authors. We also urge parents and voters, in other words, everyone, to stay informed. Some causes for concern from the higher education community. In a recent issue of Family Parenting, School and Education, Vicki Moeller writes about a blog published by Hofstra social studies educator Alan Singer about what he calls a serious flaw in the Common Core reading standards. According to the Common Core College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards for English Language Arts, ELA, deep meaning is embedded in the text of a reading passage. Now that sounds fine on the face of it. Professor Singer, however, believes that real meaning depends on not only the content alone, in other words, what's in that passage, but the content as perceived by a particular reader. In math, there are absolutes. 2 and 2, it's 4, all the time, no matter who is adding the numbers together. But language depends upon and relies upon context. Let's say, for instance, we have an article that describes different political systems. Depending on who the reader is, what era he or she lives in, his or her country of origin, financial situation, literacy, that article could be described by the viewer as a lesson in grammar, a historical perspective, an editorial supporting one of those systems or denigrating another by omission, an example of an individual of a particular social or political status, an anthropological or political study, a scientific example of the use of pen, paper, or computer. If it's read, it could be a scientific study of the use of vocal cords to communicate ideas, an example of analytical thinking, ad infinitum ad nauseam. The difference between those interpretations is context. The person on the receiving end is part of the equation, and if we're testing our kids on this, we darned well better take that into account. So do the Common Core standards really eliminate any and all context? I'm not sure. It's not clear, but clarity is important. Perhaps the standards are simply unrealistic. Some of our elected leaders, including Senator Dean Skelos here on the South Shore of Long Island, have supported the Common Core in general, but expressed reservations about how the standards have been rolled out. Principal and teacher Joanne Yatvin writes in the Phi Delta Kappan that each time she has read the ELA standards, they are more and more troubling. How old a student would you think the following standard, which really amounts to an expectation, or a rubric, applies to? Determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, including those that allude to significant characters found in mythology, e.g. Herculean. How old? My guess would have been 16, maybe a little younger, 15 or 14. The answer? 4th grade. 9 or 10-year-olds. How about this one? Describe the connection between a series of historical events, scientific ideas or concepts, or steps in technical procedures in a text. How old? Answer? 2nd graders. Really, 2nd graders. How about this one? Participate in shared research and writing projects, e.g. explore a number of how-to books on a given topic and use them to write a sequence of instructions. 1st grade. That's right, 1st grade. And this one for 3rd graders. Explain the function of nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs in general and their functions in particular sentences. Ms. Yatvin makes this point. Research has shown unequivocally that being able to name parts of speech or diagram sentences has no positive effect on students' writing. In other words, you might be able to write really well without being able to name where the adjective, pronoun, noun, or verb is in a sentence. Now the long view. Could some of what sounds so ridiculous in these examples be simply that the instructions are written in bureaucratic speak? Sure, some of it. But we have concepts in these standards that are simply not realistic, no matter how you look at them, for the ages that they're supposed to pertain to. And as in the last example, they're not relevant at all. What's troubling is that the process is hurting real children. And that's who we're after here. We're trying to help our kids. And they're being hurt because of politics and money. The state, New York State, is receiving $700 million, according to a recent article in Newsday, in Race to the Top education funding. Agreeing to the Common Core standards was part of the application for those funds. State ed officials have said, again according to a recent article in Newsday, that any delay in those reforms could lead to New York's losing millions of dollars in federal funds. Really? The U.S. Department of Education recently wrote in response to Indiana's withdrawal, and I think that they were the first to withdraw from the Common Core standards, that Indiana must prove its own standards are equal to the Common Core or risk losing federal education funding. The long view understands that. The long view is that the state will find a way to satisfy the federal mandate for education, as it should, and as should be required. However, we wonder and we're concerned that the issue might be our children's education versus money. And that's the long view. Please send your comments to longislandnytv@gmail.com.